Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this ENACT webinar on tackling transnational organized crime in inland waterways, the case of Lake Tanganyika. My name is Carina Bruwer. I am the Wildlife and Trade Unit Manager at the Endangered Wildlife Trust here in South Africa, and I'm also a former ENACT Senior Researcher for Southern Africa. I will be moderating today's webinar along with some of my fellow former colleagues. So ENACT is a project funded by the European Union and aimed at enhancing Africa's response to transnational organized crime. It is implemented by the Institute for Security Studies, Interpol, and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Lake Tanganyika is surrounded by Burundi, Tanzania, Zambia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which shares its waters and resources that they contain. Lake Tanganyika also serves as an inland transport route enabling trade and economic integration between these four countries and further afield. The lake is, however, also used to facilitate illicit trades and illicit economies, including the smuggling of wildlife like exotic birds, counterfeit goods, drugs, timber, minerals, and arms. The lake's fisheries are also under pressure from illegal fishing methods. Yet, the lake bordering countries lack the coordinated and harmonized laws, policies, and action to effectively combat illicit trades, and they also lack the general capacity to combat these trades. So in today's webinar, ENACT researchers will discuss their recent research findings on the different forms of illicit trade in Lake Tanganyika. They will consider the participating actors and the impacts of these illicit trades on the communities in the Lake Tanganyika basin. They will also consider the ways in which the riparian countries, again, namely Burundi, Tanzania, Zambia, and the DRC, have attempted to mitigate these threats. And then they will also suggest ways to strengthen the lake bordering countries' abilities to prevent illegal trade. This will be the focus of today's discussion, and these findings will also be published in an upcoming ENACT report that is authored by today's two speakers, as well as Mr. Valtino Umolo from ENACT and myself. Please note that we are live on YouTube. This event is being broadcast, and therefore Chattermouth rules do not apply. So before I introduce our two speakers for today, I would like to invite Mr. Louis Day from the European Union to offer opening remarks. Mr. Day, the floor is yours. All right, it appears that Mr. Day might not be online, so we will therefore proceed to the speakers. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, which is Dr. Willis Okumu. Willis is a senior researcher for ENACT, based at the Institute for Security Studies in Nairobi, and Dr. Michael Sitawa Muga is a researcher with the Central African Observatory on Organized Crime and Violence at the Institute for Security Studies, where he is based in Nairobi. Good morning to both of you. So I will start with you, Willis. Can you please explain to us what some of the factors are that sustain the illicit economies in the Lake Tanganyika basin?
Thank you, Carina, and welcome to everyone. I think, first of all, we need to understand that Lake Tanganyika is a shared resource, just as you've mentioned, and it's shared between the Tanzania, the DRC, Burundi, and Zambia. Tanzania having the largest share, which is 45%, DRC having 41%, Burundi 8%, and Zambia 6%. It is a regional transport corridor which serves these countries in terms of movement of goods and people. But at the same time, it has major ports across the board. So we have a port in Kigoma, we have a port in Pulungu in Zambia, we have a port in Bujumbura, and then we have a port in Kalemi in the DRC. And the fact that it is a transport corridor and is a trade, it facilitates trade across these regions has actually led to the development and rise of illicit economies that we are talking about today. So several factors basically lead to facilitate this and sustain illicit economies in Lake Tanganyika. The very first one is what you've mentioned, Carina, which is the poor coordination of trade and security within Lake Tanganyika. So we have Lake Tanganyika Authority, which is the body that is mandated by laws established in 2008 to coordinate activities around the lake. But as we established during this study, Lake Tanganyika Authority is weak, underfunded, and basically not even mandated by law to focus on issues transnational organized crime, and therefore whatever is happening beyond the purview of fishing, then they're not able to basically take care of that. Number two, we have a serious lack of enforcement. In Lake Tanganyika, we have various security personnel that are working within their own national mandates and national laws. And most of the time, there's a clash of mandates, so it brings in what is called interoperability of security systems, and therefore security response in the lake, whether there's an accident or whether there's somebody that is transporting drugs or whether somebody is transporting illegally harvested timber, you'd find that security personnel are not able to coordinate because they are working at cross purposes within each other. Number three, I will talk about the war economy. As you know, this is part of the Great Lakes, and in the Great Lakes we have the DRC and also we have Burundi. These are countries that have undergone political upheaval in recent times, as recent as when we were in the field in February and March this year, and also up to May. So the war economy in these countries basically means that there is no rule of law, and therefore lots and lots of smuggling and trafficking and everything else is happening. A good case in point is the movement of refugees to Tanzania, to Kigoma. And these people are already very vulnerable because they are running away for their own safety. And that has basically enriched illicit actors within the smuggling rings and human trafficking that are basically focused on profiting from the vulnerability of people that are running away from war. So those are the issues that I would want to point out.
Thank you very much, Willis. So basically a hotbed of different factors combining to create very conducive conditions to illicit economies. And so from your experience doing research, who are the key actors within the illicit economy's value chain in Lake Tanganyika?
Thank you again, Carina. In terms of the actors, we have noticed that there are quite a number of classification of actors. The first one would be the state actors. So this would be the military personnel, the police, the forest conservators, the game rangers, the border authorities that are working across their mandates. Basically, they are working to collaborate with organized criminal syndicates, either to facilitate the harvesting of illegal timber from conservation areas in Congo and their transportation to places like Rumonge in the DR in Burundi, and also people that are basically just benefiting from that corruption through the fact that they are sitting in state offices. So that's the number one actors that we established. Number two, we realized that business people, private business people, are also majorly profiting from organized crime in the lake. One, by transporting trafficked persons across the lake. Two, by transporting trafficked illegally harvested timber across the lake, transporting minerals and all that, and they profit from that kind of a process. And number three, communities generally, because one of the major forms of organized crime in Lake Tanganyika is actually illegal fishing. And fishermen use their boats, small boats that normally often are not registered and are not regulated, and they use these to fish in breeding spaces, in breeding areas that are prohibited by law. But also they use the same boats for the movement of people across the lake, and therefore the commission of organized crime in many ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Willis. So also highlighting the entrenched nature of corruption when we are looking at different forms of organized crime also manifesting in the lake region. And so in terms of the policy and institutional frameworks in place, can you tell us a bit more about them, what exists, and perhaps also what is absent?
I think the policy framework, we want to look at it from the global perspective. So the very first one is the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, which was passed up there at the UN level, and most of our countries across the region have actually adopted this and domesticated it into law. The issue of effectiveness, the issue of whether we are really able able to enforce this and domesticate it in our laws is another question. But most of these are signatories to the UN Convention that seeks to tackle issues of organized crime. Secondly, within the region, most of these countries are members of the SADC, South African Development, South African body of groups of states, but also members of the ICGLR, which is the Great Lakes member states. So all these countries being members of this regs basically are signatories to various laws and protocols that should be able to support or facilitate adoption of these laws in the into local legal framework that should be able basically to help us deal with that. And thirdly, Tanzania, for example, is a member of the East African Community, and in the East African Community we have the Lake Basin Commission, which is a model that we want to see Lake Tanganyika, adopting, because within the Lake Basin Commission, which is a body of the EAC, then we have Lake Victoria Fisheries Organization, which is a dedicated body that would be a model to be adopted for a focus on issues of fisheries within Lake Tanganyika. Again, we see a lot of national laws. Some of these laws are focused on the penal code. Some of them are focused on prevention of illegal wildlife trade. Some of them are focused on prevention of harvesting of timber, especially of the endangered species. All these, if adopted, if implemented, if enforced, then we are able to in a long way to deal with some of the issues that we are seeing in terms of organized crime in Lake Tanganyika.
Thank you very much, Willis, for highlighting the current policy and legal framework. So when you were identifying the factors that are driving these illicit economies, you made a few references to the war economies. And so I would now like to turn to Dr. Michael to tell us a little bit more about how these war economies have impacted what we're seeing in terms of illicit economies around the lake. So if you can please tell us a bit more about how the Congo conflict has facilitated these networks in the Lake Tanganyika basin. Thanks, Michael.
All right, very well. Thank you very much, Carina. Greetings to you all from wherever you may be listening to us from. The issue of the DRC and the war economy is one that has been with us for a while, from the 1950s, and the latest, allow me to use the word latest, is the 1994 after the Rwanda genocide, when we have a spillover of refugees into the DRC. And with that came the FDLR, who settled in the DRC. And after that, they have been trying to make attempts to capture power in Rwanda. What we now see is a constant tug of war between nations within the Great Lakes region that, to some analysts, has taken a rather ethnic twist to it. Just to appreciate the larger conflict system, it is said that we have an estimated 150 armed groups. Some place it as high as 250, all with different mandates. There are those that, mandates in quotes, there are those that are considered auto-defense groups. These are ethnic outfits that arm themselves to protect themselves from the larger armed actors, who come in, of course, with other motives that I'll later on shed light on. And then you have the category of the non-state armed actors, who come in for various reasons. One, they come in to control territory. Two, they come in to extract resources. And this actually is the raison d'etre, why we see the proliferation of TOC around the Lake Tanganyika basin, and further to which I mean within the Grand North, that is North Kivu, South Kivu, and you can go as high as Ituri, which does not fall within this domain. Specifically, you now see other armed actors. Now, specifically, you have the M23. We all, I believe, have had contact with the group that is formed, that has a history of morphing into an outfit that we now see is taking, quote unquote, a lead in resource extraction in parts of the Kivu. We have the ADF NALU operating towards the Ituri region. Then we have moving on to northwest, sorry, of the Congo, you have the Mobodo operating there. You have the FDLR, you have the Nyantura operating in areas of Masisi trying to control the gold. And now onto the Mai Mai groups that specifically operate around the Lake Tanganyika region. The largest from our study was the one controlled by General Yakutumba. This one is right on the eastern side of the lake. Then you have the others, like the one controlled by General Ngomanzito. You have the one controlled by General Muze. You have one controlled by Guidon. And of course, General Foka Mike does most of the coordination around the Uvira area. What are we seeing with these groups? These groups need to be sustained because they actually have formed themselves to fight against M23 under the outfit that we've had is known as the Wazalendo. What then happens is that for them to generate income is that they tap into this conflict system and come up with various mechanisms that will enable them ensure that they have money for ammunition, they have money for food, they have money for treatment, and so on and so forth. So we see them erecting illegal roadblocks, for starters. And out of that, they do collect tax. Two, we see them controlling mines. And the most controlled mine mineral resource there being gold, because there they say, gold is actually money. You can walk into a guest house, and trade in gold, spend a night or two, and out of that, pay using gold. So gold is actually currency. We also see that these armed groups also trade in the various minerals there. You have, of course, you have coltan, you have fauna, you have timber, you have floral commodities such as timber. You also see a lot of poaching going on in the region, not only for purposes of trade, but purposes of sustenance, because they then feed on these animals in this wildlife. Yeah. Willis has mentioned state-backed actors. Over our research, you observed that throughout history, we've seen, yes, the army is doing a good job in trying to, fight off the M23, but within the army, because of a history of what we call brassage et mixage, when we had some rebel elements joining the army, some of them have not fully, pledged their loyalty to the government in Kinshasa, and by extension, from time to time, they find themselves on the wrong side of the law, and they end up, one, renting out arms to criminal groups, okay? Two, the same groups sell their arms to rebel forces. And three, some of them actually give out entire arms caches. By this, I mean your conventional armory with a wide assortment of weapons. We also saw that in the late 1990s, there was a lot of flow of old AK-47 rifles. According to some ballistics experts, they traced these weapons to as far as Russia, making their way into the conflict system. So out of this, we see that, yes, there is the challenge of a conflict system that is anchored upon or that feeds off of TOC within the Lake Tanganyika basin. And what we now see also is that arms are now being moved from certain territories to others. We observed illegal arms being moved from, we noted that illegal arms were being moved from the DRC, and some moved all the way across to Burundi, across the lake, and some as far as Tanzania. And what we then saw is that these same arms were being used to perpetrate crimes in Tanzania. So again, facilitating TOC. We also saw pirates, some form of piracy, yeah? Where boats ferrying individuals, specifically business people, were targeted because these individuals would move from the DRC side, moving to the Tanzania side, Kigoma port, and it was known that they had cash. So they would actually get attacked and the cash taken. So this is just allow me to say a snippet of what we have in terms of the conflict system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Very interesting with regards to the arms trafficking and the different groups involved. So you've now mentioned multiple armed groups and state actors that are involved in the conflict, but are there perhaps 2 or 3 main actors that you wish to highlight that are primarily perhaps active in these illicit economies that sustain the conflict in the DRC?
Very good question, Carina. We know of the M23. All right, we know of the M23, and we know of the Wazalendo. Of course, we have other actors. We have the FDLR. We have other quote-unquote considered mercenary forces coming in from the Burundian army because they're actually being contracted to fight. Their arrangement is different. Why M23? As we speak right now, M23 is pushing towards
Apologies, Michael has briefly frozen. We will just wait for his audio to return. Perhaps while we wait for Michael's connection to re-establish itself, Willis, could you perhaps speak to us a little bit about the various modes of transport? So you've mentioned, for example, the fishing vessels being used for fishing, but also for moving other illegal commodities. But are there perhaps larger vessels that operate on the lake? What kinds of vessels are these? Are they cargo vessels? How regularly do these vessels travel across the lake? If you can maybe share some insight on that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Carina. So Lake Tanganyika is, as we said, is a huge transport corridor, and therefore there's a lot of movement of goods and people. So we have larger vessels that are carrying normally passengers that are going all the way to the DRC, and these come especially to the port of Kigoma quite frequently, like almost every week, carrying lots of passengers and goods. But we also have vessels that are carrying minerals and natural resources that are mined, that are normally coming all the way between Zambia and the port of Mpulungu all the way to Kigoma, and a lot of mid-level boats. So they are not very small boats, but they are boats that are also used for carrying household goods. So cooking oil, rice, and all sorts of household goods that are moved mostly from Tanzania, going all the way to Congo. And most of the time when we asked why is it that Tanzania seems to be supplying a lot of household goods to Congo, again it speaks to the conflict economy, the fact that because there's war, so people in Congo basically are not able to sustain lives through farming and all that, and therefore they hugely depend on goods manufactured from Tanzania, and that again facilitates a lot of production of counterfeit goods that are also going to the Congo. So the mid-level boats, we talked to boat captains that are telling us about how they are able to falsify documentation so that they're able to pay less taxes and all that. And this normally happens because of the level of trade between these countries, and the vessels that are used are the bigger boats, the bigger ships and boats that are transporting passengers, but also the middle-level ones that are majorly used for transportation of goods, mostly cooking oil, sugar, cement, and stuff like that across the lake. And of course, we mentioned the smaller ones that are majorly for fishing and for doing other illicit activities.
Thanks, Willis. And just on that topic, could you maybe elaborate a bit on whether there are vessel registration systems in the bordering countries? Is there a way to keep record of the number of vessels, the owners of the vessels, or is it effectively a free-for-all?
Yeah, so that is one of the major challenges that we established in this study. As far as we could see from the frame survey that was done by Lake Tanganyika Authority a few years back, Tanzania seems to have a level of effectiveness in small boats registration. Countries like Burundi have zero system. They don't have an idea of how many boats they have within the lake, and that basically poses a challenge because the fact that they are not able to register, it means they are not able to provide surveillance, and they are not able to get any level of reporting in terms of illicit activities that are committed by these boats. Again, Congo, similar challenges, and of course because of the political situation in the Congo. In Zambia, there's a level of registration, but it's also very, very minimal. But we also know that Zambia has quite a smaller share of the lake. So the issue of registration, the issue of surveillance within the lake, and the fact that all these things that we're discussing basically fall out of the mandate of the Lake Tanganyika Authority as we know it, as it is currently, therefore poses a very broad challenge in terms of who then is responsible for preventing cross-border TOCs within the lake itself.
Thanks, Willis. Yeah, and that's something that we definitely also realized when we were doing the research in Zambia, Valtino and myself, is because the lake shores are extensive and thousands of kilometers long. These vessels are landing anywhere, and so it's not like a traditional seaport, for example, where you would have cargo vessels landing in designated harbors or ports where the goods can be inspected and perhaps be subjected to risk assessments. Here we are seeing smaller vessels that are landing all along the shore, and therefore it's impossible to monitor what is being loaded onto and off of these vessels. At least, as you've mentioned, with the fishing vessels, they are registered in Zambia, but still, even though they are registered, they would be landing their catch wherever they see fit. So that really is a challenge. I see that Michael is back online. Michael, apologies. We seem to have lost your connection, or you seem to have lost your connection. But we were on the topic of the main actors facilitating the conflict through illicit economies. So you mentioned the M23, the FDLR, as well as some mercenary forces. But if you can please just recap again, starting with the M23 and the role that they play in the region. Thank you.
Very well, thank you very much. By virtue of the fact that I'm back, it goes to show that I said my prayer in the morning, and all is well. All right. Yes, as I was mentioning, the modus operandi of the M23 is that they do set up arms depots before in territories that they intend to attack, just to make logistical dynamics a lot easier. And this was something that was being noticed in the case of the Lake Tanganyika, where at some point authorities intercepted some gentlemen moving munitions and communication equipment from the port of Vira, attempting to get them to Kalemi. Before technology conspired against us, I was just giving the example of what happened in the case of Masisi, where M23 was moving to capture the territory, and what happened is that they set up a depot in one of the parliamentarians' compounds. So it is a modus operandi that they have mastered over time. They also, from time to time, take advantage of some few rogue elements within the military. Remember, we have the mixage et brassage. Okay, so therefore they're able to buy off these these soldiers who have divided loyalty. Okay, to either supply them with arms, supply them with the logistical support, to supply them with information, and therefore enabling them make headway into the region. So M23 remains, well, the threat of focus, because for them, their strategy is very simple. They would like to move down south, control the larger Tanganyika DRC side, control the Katanga, and hopefully have an impact on the leadership dynamics in Kinshasa, as opposed to others that tend to focus themselves, the likes of ADF, tend to stick towards the Ituri region, the Beni region, and focus their activities there. I mentioned that is the first group, that is M23. The second category is on the Wazalendo. Okay, before the Wazalendo, it was formed, we had the Mai Mai. All right, this Mai Mai basically, so from the Swahili word maji, and rituals to make them impervious, or rather bulletproof, in the African sense. Interestingly, we saw similar cases in out of the region, where people use amulets and witchcraft to make their bodies impervious to any form of bullets or gunfire. So these groups control specific territories that I had mentioned, the larger eastern part of the lake on the DRC side, not the western part of the lake, the eastern part of the DRC on the side of the lake. And what we see is that they put up the illegal roadblocks and collect illegal taxes. They control mines. They control timber movement. They also control child labor. Okay, remember, for people to engage in these mines, there is a lot of child labor involved, and this was a concern that we actually saw as a spillover, on the side of Tanzania, and in some cases we saw some Burundians coming into Tanzania to engage in certain illegal activities that I would wish to highlight later on. Of the Mai groups that are involved there, you also have the Wambuti. The Wambuti now also control the port of Uvira together with the FRDC. Okay, they collect the taxes again. They collect the taxes as late as last week. For one to move a motorcycle across a roadblock, you need to pay 3,000 francs. That's about $1. Now, in a war economy that is struggling, if this individual is to move from one point to another and encounter, say, 5 roadblocks, you can imagine the kind of expenditure that they have to incur. So it's been draining the populations. Equally, these same groups rely on children to engage in certain activities such as sexual slavery, okay, the movement of some of these minerals from point A to B, and so on and so forth. We also see, as Willis had mentioned, there is some element of rogue state element support, where you have customs officials who look the other way. You do have port officials who will look the other way. You have security forces who will either look the other way or simply do not have the capacity to do anything about the illegal movement of these minerals. So that is what we see on the larger side. As I mentioned, we have M23. On the southern side, trying to push out the M23 from capturing the Uvira territory. You have the likes of Maimaya Kutumba, you have the likes of the Wambuti there. And it also takes an ethnic twist, interestingly. Within that region of the Lake Tanganyika basin, you have 2 ethnic communities, the Fuliru and the Bembe. These are what we observed as battle-hardened communities that are trained to protect their territories. They have this saying, they say, la patrie ou la mort. Yes, either of our motherland or death. And they have managed to really stage a spirited defense against the capture of Uvira, though as we speak right now, there's a lot of possibilities that it may fall to the arms of the M23. So I wish to leave it at that. Thank you very much. If there's any issue that may not have come out very clearly, we'll be happy to interrogate during the Q&A. Back to you, Carina.
Thank you so much, Michael.
You're welcome.
Willis, I was wondering, because you, of course, have done similar research on Lake Victoria, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the different forms of wildlife crime that you saw on Lake Tanganyika. I know in Zambia we had very interesting cases of birds being smuggled for the pet trade via the lake. But perhaps if you can speak a little bit about some of the other wildlife crimes that you encountered, and then perhaps separate the wildlife crimes with illegal fishing, which I'll ask you about afterwards. So Willis, if you can please share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks again, Carina. So, in Lake Tanganyika, we saw a lot of what we'd call exotic birds, so the shoebill, the wattle crane, and most of these, they're breeding in places that you'd want to consider to be protected conservation areas. So Some of these are in the islands, some of these are in some of the shores that basically are within areas that are protected by law. And again, we see a lot of these birds, all of them listed in IUCN as endangered, and therefore really the state policy framework should be focusing on those. But most of the time, the action is very, very limited. At the same time, Lake Tanganyika is also home to a lot of apes. So we have chimps, we have bonobos, we have all sorts of apes across the basin in Congo, Burundi, and Tanzania, and a lot of again, most of this by virtue of the fact that they're endangered, they're in protected sanctuaries, but recent data also show that there's a lot of activity and sale and trade of body parts or whole baby animals across the region, and this basically feeds into the illegal wildlife trade that is going on, especially the pet trade that is booming in Saudi Arabia and going all into Saudi Arabia through Yemen. So comparatively, because you've asked about Lake Victoria, if you look at it in terms of Lake Victoria, we saw a similar case in an island, I think it's called Ngama Island in Uganda, where again the apes were being targeted. But again, comparing again with Lake Victoria, the difference is that most of the islands in Lake Victoria are actually settled. So it means there's been a bigger impact on wildlife. So most of these have been hunted down or captured and traded. In Lake Tanganyika, the sanctuaries are there, but increasing human activity in terms of capturing of birds, selling of eggs, capturing of baby apes and all that is increasingly having a negative impact in terms of conservation of this species. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I remember one of the law enforcement entities that we spoke to in Zambia noting that because there isn't a lot of wildlife remaining in the Zambian side, at least, apart from one of the national parks in Sumbu, that's why we're not seeing necessarily a lot of wildlife crimes, but it's really just because of, as you've mentioned, the small portion of the lake owned by Zambia, as well as the limited wildlife that occur in the region. But we are still seeing wildlife from other regions being smuggled through there as well. So earlier you mentioned a little bit about the household goods that are being smuggled between different countries, especially to the DRC, which of course has increasing needs with regards to food insecurity. And I remember in Zambia we were told about large shipments of maize being exported illegally because there's currently a ban on the export of maize to ensure that all of the maize remains in Zambia for local consumption. And I was wondering if you could speak to the view of illegality of these economies. You know, we call them illicit economies because they are violations of the law, but how were they perceived by the people that you spoke to, whether it's, you know, the export of maize, of cooking oil, of clothing, of even illegal fishing? Was it seen as illegal activity, or is it a way of survival?
Largely, it's a way of survival because, for example, there's a lot of African print dresses called kitenge that is coming from the DRC into Tanzania. So in Tanzania, it's prohibited. It's not supposed to come because, you know, it's affecting their textile industry. But it is cheaper. And it is a good design, and people are buying it, and it's part of the normal lifestyle, especially among the women. If you look at it across the other side, a lot of these household goods, whether it's cooking oil, whether it's maize, whether it's salt, all these things, and rice are going to Congo. Tanzania seems to be producing a lot of rice. So if you go to all the ports, and we went to about 10 of them, and I talked to port officials, rice seemed to be one of the major things that is passing through. When it leaves Tanzania, it lives in Tanzania in a very legal sense, because everything seems to be, well documented. But the challenge is that there's under declaration of whatever is on the boat. And therefore, when they get to the port in DRC, they're able to falsify documents and get the goods into Congo and make whatever profit that they are seeking. So the demand is definitely there, and there's the element of falsification, and the fact that they're able to bribe port and custom officials on the other side, therefore makes it look, like it's against the law. But to the people who are receiving, to the people that are part of this value chain, it's part of normal interaction that they have been part of for ages. Again, you could say the same about the movement of building materials. On the one part, they are passing through the ports, but a lot of times also they are using the mid-level boats that can also be able to dock at a landing site. So still they're fulfilling the need, but doing it slightly behind the law or against the law. So there's always that scenario where to the recipients or to the people that are participating in the process, they don't see it as purely illegal. It is survival and it's normal.
Yeah, and of course that's why countering it or addressing it is so difficult, because it takes place at this gray area of people attempting to survive versus violating the law, which makes addressing the issue purely through law enforcement very ineffective, as we've seen with other transnational organized crimes. So then turning to the responses before we open up the floor for questions from the audience, how can regional institutions like the Lake Tanganyika Authority effectively respond to emerging transnational threats in Lake Tanganyika? Perhaps, Willis, we can have you answer the question and then we can ask the same question to Michael.
Yeah, I think one of the things we established in this study is that despite the fact that the Lake Tanganyika Authority has been in place since 2008, it is largely ineffective. And I want to say that it's ineffective because of the limitation of its mandate. So this authority was established purely to deal with fisheries development, the fisheries industry across the 4 countries. And I don't think they anticipated or they ignored the fact that the lake is an area where there's more than just fishing. There's a lot of business going on, and with that means movement of people and all that. And therefore, to tackle organized crime in Lake Tanganyika, perhaps there needs to be a rethink on how, on the extension of the mandate of the Lake Tanganyika Authority, so that it is able to tackle real current emerging issues, among them maritime security on the lake, because issues of registration of boats, for example. So if you have Tanzania with a bit of capacity to do that, Zambia doing a bit of their part, Burundi and the DRC, having 0 figures on that. So it tells you that if even the bigger ships, even the bigger boats that are leaving Kigoma to go to Mpulungu or any other place, the Lake Tanganyika Authority doesn't seem to have an idea on what is happening on the lake, except for periodic frame survey, which basically are fisheries studies that shows, what kind of species of fish is in the lake and how many fishers and all that. So one of the things that they basically need to do is to have a rethink on is it sufficient to just focus on fisheries development? What about overall maritime security? What about all these new actors that are emerging on the lake that are walking around or traveling around with minerals and all that? So that is one thing that they're supposed to do. Secondly, I think they also need to develop specialized institutions that will actually focus on some of the major organized crime typologies within the lake. For example, illegal fishing. So we established in this study that some of the species of fish that are being taken out of the lake, for example, ornamental fish that is gotten from some of the small islands in Lake Tanganyika on the Tanzania side, there seems to be no data on this kind of trade. And when we talk to fisheries officials, they were focused more on the bigger species, and of course, because this is part of the bigger trade. But we could also notice that there were small offices and shops around some of the ports, quite a bit on the landing sites, that are actually focused on the trade on ornamental fish. And most of these were going to Europe, to Canada, and places like that. So in the mold of Lake Victoria Fisheries Organization, is it possible, perhaps, for these guys at the Lake Tanganyika Authority to think of a specialized policy institution, say Lake Tanganyika Fisheries Organization, that now focuses and deals with the major organized crime within the lake, which is illegal fishing? Okay. Number three, there's a challenge with sharing of information, security information across the border, and this is basically because of different enforcement mandates. We have people with the military there. Some people have the maritime police. All these guys are operating on different wavelengths, and if possible, then we need, for us to be able to effectively tackle TOC, then we need to have a framework for information sharing. And issues of joint patrols, we had discussions with some of these guys across the ports, and they would tell you that, we can only go up to our boundary. We can't go beyond. And because we know that's the end of our country. So is it possible to have such kind of frameworks where people are able to collaborate in having security mandates? Again, we are talking about the need for Lake Tanganyika Authority to work with communities. Already, they are working with communities in terms of fisheries. But what about further collaborations with communities and CSOs on matters, organized crime, matters security, so that you can get that level of local reporting? That, again, is missing. The other one is on the registration of the small boats. As we have said, it is a bit effective in Tanzania, similarly in Zambia, totally absent in the other two countries. Is there a framework? Can we come up with a framework that ensures that we have information on the small boats that are within the lake? Thank you.
Thank you. So you've mentioned quite a few things that made me reflect on our time in Zambia, and definitely the cross-border cooperation that is lacking was something that came up consistently in our discussions. And I don't know with your fieldwork in Tanzania, but in Zambia we were told that Zambia and Tanzania work quite well together. They have joint meetings and discussions. They have on and off good cooperation and joint operations with the DRC, but no one really was mentioning about cooperation with Burundi. And I also know that we had great difficulty in getting interviews in Burundi. So definitely with regards to cross-border cooperation, there is much that can be improved. Then just quickly before we turn to Michael, you have referred to the need to work with communities. And I know in Tanzania there are beach management units, and there's a similar structure, community structure in Zambia. Could you maybe just elaborate a little bit on the role that those units, perhaps specifically in Tanzania, play?
Yeah, so across Tanzania, and of course also borrowing from our study in Lake Victoria, we have the beach management units, which are fisheries co-management units, basically based at the beaches or at the landing sites, that normally are mandated to register fisher folks, fisher people. They're also mandated to conserve the areas around the beach, so environmental protection. They are also mandated to report on any other activity that is happening around there. So a lot of times, like what we saw in Tanzania, the beach management units are very critical in getting the fisheries data, but also any other security data that you'd want to establish, what is going on here, what kind of fish are you having, and whose boat is this, All that information normally is within the BMUs. The challenge is that in many cases of criminality, the BMUs, being members of community and being the boat owners and being the business people around the lake and around the beaches, they are at many times very complicit in the smuggling of people using the same boats. They are also very complicit sometimes in fishing in protected areas, which ideally they should be the people that are protecting, because these are breeding sites that would enable regeneration of fish species. So the challenge with the BMUs across the region, and I've seen this across East Africa, is that they have become part of the organized crime syndicate. They're basically anchoring whatever is happening illegally in the lake, because what it was described to us in the field that these are the consultants. These are the guys with kind of legal mandate, but also they know the lake geographically. So they would be at one landing site and you want to smuggle something, and they know geographically that if I take this route, then I know I'm going to Zambia, So how then can this structure, which is very important for the management of the fishery sector and also the beaches, then be reformed? Because the feedback we are getting from the ground is that currently, as it is constituted, these beach management units are actually facilitating and benefiting from all sorts of organized crimes that are happening. So part of what we advocate for, therefore, is that can bodies such as the LTA, Lake Tanganyika Authority, and even the fisheries departments within the member states, see how to reform these BMUs, so that one, they're really representing people that are doing fishing. Two, they are representative of the people that live and work within that geography. And three, so that they are also accountable in terms of who are they carrying, where are they fishing, and what is going on within where they're operating. So there's basically a call for reform of this fisheries management structure, because it has been established through this study that they are actually they're complicit in the commission of organized crimes.
Thanks, Willis. So again, highlighting the very grey area in which these units operate and illegal networks operate. So Michael, then just lastly to you before we turn to the audience, can you please give us your thoughts on how the regional institutions like the Lake Tanganyika Authority, or perhaps establishing new institutions or other existing institutions, could assist the lake countries to better respond to transnational organized crime?
Very well, thank you very much. I couldn't agree more with the responses given by Dr. Okumu on how to approach the current scenario that we face, not only from a TOC perspective, but generally from a Great Lakes and regional stability perspective. First of all, I'll insist on the aspect of the Lake Tanganyika Basin being mandated to handle matters, peace and security, and taking care of issues of movement of these arms that we are seeing. Why? Because the current mandate is lacking in that, and equally the need to finance the Lake Tanganyika Basin Authority effectively. Because what we observed is that in some parts, yes, you'll hear of it. In other parts, you'll hear of it, and they say, yes, we've heard of it, but it is moribund. In the DRC, there was no mention of it. That is around the area of Uvira, Kalemi. There was no mention of the Lake Tanganyika basin and that authority, and that tells you that there is a lack of a footprint there. Okay. Two, I would wish to bring in the aspect of regional blocks. The DRC and Tanzania are members of the EAC and SADC. Okay, we have seen the deployment of peacekeeping forces. Okay, we've seen ECRAF deployed, the East Africa Community Regional Force deployed and left. Then SADC came in and left. What needs to happen, in my view, is a redeployment of these joint forces with the mandate of stabilization and creation of what I would consider a buffer zone. Why? As long as we have these M23 versus there was a Lendo and FDLR and Burundian forces, namely, we shall have the proliferation of small arms and Bukavu fell. You know, soldiers would just abandon their weapons by the roadside and take off. So these arms would find themselves in the, under the control of children. Children, I mean 16 and below. Then, of course, they would then find their way into the market and now creating the problems we are seeing. So my view is that we need to have a joint EAC SADC force deployed with a mandate to engage in DDR and post-conflict reconstruction. There is a saying in the DRC, some parts, where they say, "Kama hakuna wakala hakuna kazi." If there is no war, there is no peace, there is no work. We need alternative livelihoods around this. The same, actually, interestingly, last week when I was in Cameroon, the Boko Haram have something called Chira, where it is work. War is work. Okay. They say life is livable with a rifle in your hands. So if we're able to mop up these weapons, one, and provide alternative livelihoods, hey, I think we'd be moving the right direction. Willis mentioned something to do with stronger partnerships between these states, okay? Especially when it comes to patrols, security operations, and information sharing. There was a clear mention of the absence of an extradition treaty existent within the Lake Tanganyika basin. And therefore, pirates would commit crimes in the DRC and come hide in Tanzania. Commit crimes in Tanzania, go hide in Burundi. And there is that arrangement where we have, the extradition of such characters missing. I believe, in my view, would be a good adage. We need to also track illegal immigrants. We have individuals moving from DRC into Tanzania, Burundi into Tanzania, and they are now engaging in all sorts of crime related to the lake. In the case of Tanzania, we saw that most of the fishermen are actually Congolese, and they actually engage in ritualistic killings once a year, where they would sacrifice some individuals to the lake to please the gods of the lake, so that their harvest or their catches throughout there would be bountiful. We also saw issues of children cleaning nets. And when you asked around, we are told these are Burundian children, okay? These are migrants who've come in and they're looking for jobs. Their labor is cheaper than the local rate. So again, we see a lot of children moving across the border for various purposes. We noticed issues to do with the sex work, commercial sex work. In Kigoma, there was a boom in the hostels, in the guest house industry. So again, we are not only looking at the Lake Tanganyika Basin Authority taking care of the issue of peace and security, but also the movement of individuals across the border. And we saw a lot of children involved in child prostitution, as we observed in the case of Kigoma. Again, there's a need to strengthen alternative economies around the environment. What do I mean by this? Tourism, okay? If we have a peace and stability, then we can talk of tourism. I'll go quickly in the interest of time. Lake Tanganyika is big. How about a tech-heavy surveillance system where we are looking at drone technology? We observe that, patrolling by boat is very costly because of the fuel. our view was that if we go the route of drone surveillance, we could make a lot more headway in patrolling the lake. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Back to you, Carina.
Thank you, Michael. And I'm very glad that you mentioned the matter of drones and technology. And something that we noticed is how there is very limited technological maritime domain awareness ability across the entire lake. It's basically what law enforcement can see and the intelligence that they receive from people living around the lake. So definitely something that is very important to consider for the lake. And then also, I think very importantly, what we've seen with any organized crime is the need for this holistic response. It's not just a law enforcement response that we need. It is social services, it's immigration, it is economic development and creation of livelihoods. And so unless all of these are addressed, we're going to likely see the continuation of these illicit economies around the lake. So thank you so much for both of your inputs. I will give you an opportunity for final remarks after our Q&A session, but I would now like to turn to the audience. I see, so just before we get to the audience questions, you will see that there is a poll that has just gone up. If the audience can please respond to the poll, just so that we can get your feedback on this webinar. And then I see that the first question is from Mr. Timothy Walker. I do believe he has two questions actually. So Tim, could you please ask those questions to our two panelists, perhaps just stating the institution that you represent and who your question is posed to. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Carina. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Tim Walker from the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you for the great presentation. I'll start my video as well. Okay. Stand by.
We can see you.
Okay. Yeah, no, Michael during the presentation mentioned piracy on piracy attacks, and it just got me thinking about some of the challenges that states might have, the lake states of legally classifying certain crimes and agreeing on a way of fighting it. And I just wondered if you could expand upon some of the types of attacks, because to my mind they seem much more like armed robbery. But I'm not sure if these have been penalised in the penal code or the kind of frameworks around there as a deterrent, primarily maybe to these kind of acts on sea. And the second one, perhaps to Willis, and I'm thinking here a little bit more about the Lake Chad Basin Commission, how that has played more of a security role when it was not set up as such. And there are similar lake basin commissions in the area you're focusing on, and just whether those also could be the sites of future securitization in a sense as well, and the role they might play. I have a sense that it's best for them not to play that kind of role, but we've seen that adaptation occur elsewhere in the continent, and given there is a likelihood of substantial insecurity if nothing is done, that perhaps these are the actors in place to do something to anchor some kind of joint patrols like you mentioned, and various things like that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tim. So Michael, if you could perhaps respond to the first question with regards to the piracy attacks. Of course, looking at the legal definition of piracy, which is a high seas crime, these would be armed robbery. I guess piracy is just the generic term that we use. But if you could perhaps, Michael, just expand on what form these armed attacks have taken on the Lake Tanganyika, within the Lake Tanganyika region.
Very well. Thank you very much, Timothy, for your question. What we observed is the definition of what the kind of crimes that we were being described to, according to the locals, were considered acts of piracy. One, we saw the attacking of individuals, specifically business individuals who would be carrying money, say, from the DRC side, moving on to the Kigoma side to purchase commodities. And because of information sharing, maybe this is a businessman who's collected money on behalf of a business community. It is known, or they are tracked and information given out, and then the attackers then commandeer the vessel, steal the money, and off they go. We also observed the stealing of boat engines. Probably Willis would later on come in to shed light on this. We saw vessels being commandeered, and all that will be taken was just the boat engine, and then be left out, in the lake. Those were the main areas that we saw. But otherwise, in terms of the wider scheme of piracy, commandeering vessels and asking for ransom was not an aspect that we observed. So in terms of mitigation, what we saw that one, a proposal was given to have the business community move their money through the banking system, okay? Through the banking system. And two, for the boat engines, registration of these vessels as well as the boat engines was a recommendation given, okay, just to mitigate the crimes that we observed are taking place. Can I call upon Willis to shed a bit more light on that, please?
Thanks. Yes, please, Willis.
Yeah, so in terms of the violence or the crimes that happen in the lake, we wouldn't probably just describe it as piracy. They are more like robberies, and really mostly people that are looking for the engines, as Michael has said, and stealing of the fuel. So a lot of these people are also just targeting the boat engine so that they can be able to drain off the fuel and run away with it. We've seen a lot of cases where the goods that are being transported across the borders, whether it is cement, whether it is rice, whether it is cooking oil, is also just taken, guys come with arms and take over and then offload to a nearby small boat and then take off with it. And we've also seen a lot of stealing of fish. So again, a boat approaches and empties the other boat, at gunpoint and also takes off with it. So I wouldn't call it piracy. We have seen similar stuff happening in Lake Victoria, and it's quite similar to what is happening in Lake Tanganyika. So they are just people that are taking advantage that of taking opportunity by the fact that they know that there's no proper security within the lake, and therefore they want to quickly profit from the vulnerability of other people that are legitimately doing business or fishing within the lake, and this is very, very common.
Yeah. Thanks, Willis. And if I recall correctly, we did note one incident in Zambia where a fisherman was actually held hostage in exchange for a ransom, but that was an exceptional case, if I recall correctly. Then with regards to Tim's second question, on, for example, the Lake Chart Basin Commission that effectively evolved into a security actor, I think both you, Willis and Michael, have noted the potential role in security that the Lake Tanganyika Authority could play. I will comment on this realistically. I think that is extremely unlikely. We could not even get the Lake Tanganyika Authority to engage with us for this research. So perhaps to make this question a bit more realistic, who could play this role? Are there other commissions or lake commissions that could potentially play this role? As I've asked earlier, a new established one, or do you perhaps, similar to Michael, think that the East African community and SADC could potentially put together a body to address this?
I think it's either. So either they can put up a cross-regional body that basically handles that mandate, or they could enhance the capacity of Lake Tanganyika Authority so that it's able then to go beyond its current mandate of fisheries to be able to address that. But again, Tim is talking about whether by doing that then we are securitizing the lake, which perhaps is true, because what I've seen, borrowing again from Lake Victoria, is that because of the contestation of fisheries resources within the lake, which eventually perhaps will also happen in Lake Tanganyika. Uganda, for example, created really a new unit within the army and called it Fisheries Protection Unit. So they created their own unit of military personnel and gave them the mandate to protect their their fisheries sector by protecting their fisheries boundaries. So what we see in Lake Victoria is a lot of killings by the military, the Ugandan military, a lot of arrests, a lot of abductions, and they take all the boats and go with them away to the nearest Ugandan beach, and then they take them to court. And most of the time, they are very, very tough on local fishermen, so they prosecute them on military courts. So this level of hard security that team is talking about, perhaps in Lake Chad Commission, could be the unintended consequence of what we are trying to address. But if we are to mirror the initial vision of Lake Victoria Commission and replicate it in the Lake Tanganyika situation, then it would have to be something that that has components of security units cooperating,
Sure.
so that nobody, if people are deploying, let's say, the Coast Guard or people are deploying Marine Police, then everybody is deploying Marine Police, not the Army. Because I think that is where we are seeing some of these problems emerging. Because the moment you bring the Army and everybody has the police, then you are operating at different levels with different mandates and with different ways of doing things, and that would be catastrophic, and that would basically be counter to what we want to achieve in terms of bringing that element of peace and security within the lake. So we would not want to go hard security in terms of having military units running around, but have a well-coordinated security structure, security and surveillance structure that enables cooperation, enables surveillance, but also enables, brings in the citizens. Because what the Ugandans are doing right now is that it's very difficult for local people to talk to the military, So we need to rethink how then we have this balance so that we secure the lake and secure the people, so that we can then be able to get, people reporting very freely on what is happening and what they're observing.
Thanks, Willis. Very good points. Michael, did you want to add anything to the securitization through these commissions or regional bodies?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Carina. I agree with what Willis has just shared, quite detailed. Just to add to it, the aspect of community agency in many cases has been downplayed when we are talking of issues of lake security, maritime security. And in many cases, whatever happens at the shores of the lake is known to the community. It all depends on how the security actors come to collect the information and what they do with it later on. In the case of beach management units, Carina, you mentioned that there is need to strengthen these beach management units with the necessary training, capacity building, and hopefully some incentivization, okay? Where it would make sense to be an official in a beach management unit and achieve the mandate of the unit that would speak to the larger proposed peace and security element of the Lake Tanganyika Basin Authority. During the study, we observed that yes, there was a presence of the military, but there at each and every port, though there were those that are yet to have the deployment of the naval units, but these were established to protect the ports. So there was nothing like patrolling. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the cost of patrolling is not very cheap. So you just see that there's a presence of military, more of a deterrence, to any chaos around the port or any criminal activity around the port. But the lake remained vulnerable. We saw in some cases, there was one port, Willis, if you don't mind jogging my memory, there was one port that had been totally taken over by Congolese immigrants. And that specific port was known as a channel to bring in arms, a channel to smuggle gold, and the state presence to move in there was limited. Equally, the same group had actually attacked the official port up the road. And this then again speaks to the need to have a robust authority that would not only support the security aspect on each side of the lake, but have an issue of interoperability across the security agencies. Yes, it is called Korongwe. We were actually there, and we assisted one lady, one fisherman, dock, and there was no form of state presence. Yet it was known, according to the authorities, that gold comes in through there. The vitenge that Willis talked of coming in through there, they call them vikwembe. We also know that the arms coming through there, illegal immigrants coming through there. So just to appreciate the larger scheme of things, interoperability of the various state security forces is critical, and community agency to this specific mandate is critical. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So again, highlighting the whole of society approach to addressing even security issues. Then we have another question online. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. It's Buta Suba. Buta, I don't know if you would like to ask your question in person or whether you're happy for me to read it. If you could maybe just give me an indication. Okay, I think I will just read her question. So the question was, do they have a common...
I would like to ask it in person.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Buta. Apologies. Your signal seems a little bit weak, so if you could maybe just ask your question slowly. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the talk. What I like to ask, they have mentioned the need of armies coming in to try and control. But due to the period that has happened in there, have we heard a common chat? Okay. Have we had a common body that is able to address these issues along? Also, the second one would be, we are having issues to do with the fights along the waters, in line with the threats and in line with the resources. For example, in Migingo, we will see what would happen with Ugandan police force will come in and arrest people, and also there will be issues of arresting the persons operating along that area. Are we seeing the same also in this Lake Tanganyika, because it's border countries? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Willis, I suspect that question is directed primarily to you as the Lake Victoria and now Lake Tanganyika expert. Would you like to answer, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Buta Suba. Do we have a common body that addresses these issues? I want to believe he's talking about in Lake Tanganyika Basin. Largely, no, because the common body, which is Lake Tanganyika Authority, is not mandated beyond issues of fisheries development. And therefore, a lot of interventions that happen are basically carried out by national institutions, whether it's the national police of whichever country that is intervening to secure its border or to prevent crime at their own level. So that level of lack of coordination is perhaps a challenge that we need to address. So we don't have a common body, let's say Lake Victoria Basin Commission, that would address regional issues that pertain to the lake. And the other question is whether we have, do we see issues, say, of Migingo happening in Tanganyika? Again, Migingo is an island in Lake Victoria that was quite initially contested between Kenya and Uganda. It's a small place the size of a football pitch, that is full of iron sheet houses, but it's very rich in the Nile perch fish. So that was the real issue of contention. So in Lake Tanganyika, we have not seen countries going toe to toe about a specific geography, let's say an island within Lake Tanganyika. But what we know is that the islands, especially in the lake within Tanzania, within the DRC, are actually very, very rich in wildlife species and exotic birds and the apes, and therefore perhaps it's not happening now. There's no country-to-country contestation and threat of war, but with time, with population increasing and people needing to survive, there could be such issues, and unless then we establish mechanisms to address issues of resource sharing across these boundaries that are actually in the lake. So the water boundaries are always very much contested, and we therefore need to have a framework that anticipates and addresses some of these contestations before they arise.
Thank you, Willis. Could we see by the show of hands, perhaps? I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A box. Is there anyone who would like to pose a question to our speakers? All right, I'm not seeing anything. Then perhaps just before I give you the floor for final comments, we do have our other co-author online, Mr. Valtino Umolo. Valtino, is there anything that you would like to add that you think has not been addressed yet today?
No, Carina, I think both Willis and Michael gave very insightful comments on the questions you had asked. So in that regard, I don't have any additions to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Valtino. So then please offer your final comments. Let's start with you, Michael, just to close off. Final thoughts, perhaps interesting creative ideas on how to address these illicit markets. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Carina. When you mention the need to address illicit markets, I look at the need to provide alternative livelihoods, legitimate livelihoods around the lake and on the lake. What we saw was a market driven by the lack of legitimate livelihoods, in as much as the potential for this is quite high. In the case of Tanzania, in the case of DRC, we saw a case of an underpopulated territories that hold a lot of potential in terms of providing these alternative livelihoods. Equally, you have ethnic communities spilling over from one side to the other. And what then we saw is that the aspect of tapping into community agency to secure this lake is an option that nations can tap into. The Lake Tanganyika Basin Authority is, in my view, the instrument, I would say the go-to instrument, the go-to institution. All we need to ensure that we need to push for it to be well-resourced, well-capacity built, and we will then see a movement in the right direction. Interesting, Major Suba asked about the Migingo Island incidences and the possibilities of them happening on the side of the Lake Tanganyika. What we observed again is that if fishermen move from Kigoma towards other territories to engage in fishing, so as competition, resource competition increases, we are bound to see conflict coming up. So there is no harm in us preparing ourselves to mitigate in advance. I'd like to leave it at that. Thank you very much. Back to you, Carina.
Thanks, Michael. I think a great note to finish us off, looking at preventative measures rather than reactive measures when it's already too late. Willis, your final comments, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think we, as the ISS, have now conducted 2 studies. So the first one was on Lake Victoria. This has been on Lake Tanganyika. And even if you look at the level of discussion and engagement that the previous paper we did had, we see a lot of increased focus on inland waterways, because previous policy actions have actually focused so much on the ocean. So, for example, for us in East Africa, it's been the Indian Ocean. A lot of policy interventions, a lot of deployment of security, and a lot of total blackout for the lakes. Africa is obviously well endowed with a lot of these inland waterways, so Lake Tanganyika being one of them, others being in Southern Africa, Lake Malawi and all that. And I think the fact that we are giving attention and giving policy opinion on inland waterways shows that there's need to focus on these critical natural resources because of the trade that they sustain, because of the wildlife that they sustain, because of the communities that they sustain around that. And therefore, that is one thing that I think should be our takeaway. Number 2, there's a lot of movement of people within these lakes, and this is generally whether you are talking about lakes in the east, on the south, wherever it is in the continent. And interestingly, the people that are moving a lot are young people. And they are young, vulnerable people. So as we gave example of Lake Tanganyika, people moving from the DRC and Burundi, all the young people that we met that were cleaning boats, some of them were children, they're young women that were being moved across border for sexual exploitation, prostitution. And what we established again in this study is that they're just moving in. There's no form of registration, there's no form of documentation, and it calls for what has been established across some of these countries in the region, that we need to have some level of coordinated civil registration, what they call the one-stop border post, so that people are able to be documented. And therefore, and if they can be documented, then it means you can prevent the exploitation of young people that are moving across the region. So I think we need to have discussions around this movements within these inland waterways, and also the level of trade that sometimes could be very, very harmful for, again, the same young people. And thank you. I'd like to leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Willis. So highlighting important things to consider, the fact that Africa in general is a very youthful continent, and so we are seeing pressure by the youth seeking opportunities when there aren't alternative livelihoods presenting themselves in legal markets. And then, of course, the important role that these lakes play as a lifeline for the people living around them, who depend on these lakes for fishing, for water, for transport. And so, again, highlighting how important it is to secure these lakes, to make them a facilitator of legal trade and not illegal trade. So thank you so much to both of our speakers. This then concludes today's webinar on illicit trade in Lake Tanganyika. Thank you so much again, Willis and Michael. We appreciate your insights. Everyone, please remember that this is just an introductory session on a report that will be published by ENACT very soon, looking at illicit trades in Lake Tanganyika, including in Burundi, Tanzania, the DRC, and Zambia. So thank you so much again, everyone. Thank you also for the audience online who has joined us. Have a fantastic weekend ahead.